The air was heavy that night, thick with the kind of stillness that presses against your chest, making every breath feel stolen. I was only a child, curled under a quilt in our creaky old house when I first heard it, a low guttural sound that clawed its way through the walls, like the mountains themselves were groaning in pain. My name is Samantha, and I grew up in a forgotten hollow of the Appalachian Mountains, where the world felt ancient, untouched by time. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road, the kind that turned to sludge when the rains came, flanked by a forest so dense it seemed to swallow light itself. My mother vanished when I was 4, leaving only whispers of her memory, a scent of lavender, a fleeting smile I could never quite hold on to. My father was a ghost of a different kind, his name absent from my birth certificate, his existence a question mark. My grandparents, weathered by life, and the mountains took me in. Grandpa, with his calloused hands from years in the coal mines, and Grandma, who coaxed life from her garden to keep us fed, were my world. We lived on meager disability checks, and the game Grandpa hunted our lives stitched together with resilience and quiet fear. The fire in our wood stove crackled as Grandpa's voice filled the room, low and deliberate, weaving tales that made the shadows dance. He spoke of the Cherokee who once walked these lands of blood feuds that lingered like curses, and of creatures that haunted the deepest hollers. But one story always held me captive, the Appalachian howler. It's older than these mountains, he'd say, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. Bigger than a bear, fiercer than a wolf, with a scream that'll freeze your soul. He described it as a beast of nightmare, its form a grotesque blend of fur and muscle, its cry a jagged blade that cut through the night. It hunted only on the new moon, when the sky was a void, and its howl was both a warning and a promise. "Listen close, Samantha," he'd whisper, leaning in his breath, warm against my ear. "As long as it's howling, you're safe. But when the silence comes, it's found you." Those words sank into me, rooting deep in my bones. I was a child, enthralled by the terror of it, my heart racing with delicious dread. But there was something in Grandpa's eyes, a flicker of truth behind the storyteller's mask, that made me wonder if this was more than a tale to keep me from wandering. On new moon nights, our house became a fortress. Grandma checked the locks obsessively, her fingers trembling as she tested each bolt. Grandpa hauled in firewood, stacking it high as if preparing for a siege. They never let me outside after dusk, their voices sharp with an urgency they never explained. No sense taking chances. Grandma would mutter, her eyes darting to the windows where the curtains were drawn tight against the dark. I was too young to question it then, but I felt the weight of their fear heavy as the feet that clung to the hollow. The mountains were alive in a way I couldn't understand, their shadows whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I'd lie awake, listening to the wind, wondering if it carried the howler's cry. The story was a thrill, a shiver that made my skin prickle. But it was Grandpa's gaze, distant, haunted, that planted a seed of unease. What did he know? What had he seen? The mountains held their secrets close, and I was too small to pry them loose. But I would learn soon enough that some stories aren't meant to stay stories. The house creaked under the weight of the night, and I'd clutch my quilt tighter, imagining the howler prowling just beyond the trees. Its scream echoed in my mind, a sound I hadn't yet heard, but already feared. When the howling stops, it's found you. Those words became a mantra, a warning I carried into every new moon, a shadow that grew longer with each passing year. I didn't know then that I'd face the truth of it, that the mountains would show me their darkest heart. But that night, as a child, I only felt the pull of something ancient, something watching, waiting for the moment I'd step too far into its domain. The hollow was my home, but it was also a cage. The forest loomed its branches, clawing at the sky, and I sensed it even then, a presence that didn't belong to the world I knew. Grandpa's stories weren't just tales. They were maps to survival warnings etched in the lines of his weathered face. Stay inside. Stay safe. I obeyed, but the mountains had other plans. The howler was out there, and it knew my name. The scream tore through the night, like a blade through flesh, low and guttural, then rising into a wail that made my heart stutter. It wasn't the wind, not a coyote, not anything I'd ever heard. It was alive, and it was close. I was 8 years old, tucked into bed in our drafty house, the October chill seeping through the walls. The nightlight cast faint shadows across my ceiling, flickering like ghosts in the corners of my vision. I wasn't asleep, not quite too restless, too aware of the darkness pressing against the windows. The new moon had swallowed the sky, leaving the world in a suffocating black. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint, a rumble I felt more than heard, vibrating through the floorboards. Then it grew a jagged, rasping sound that seemed to claw its way out of the earth itself. It wasn't a howl like any animal I knew. No wolf, no coyote. It was broken, unnatural, like a voice trying to speak through a ruined throat. The sound wove patterns that felt almost like words alien and incomprehensible, each note tightening the knot in my chest. I threw off my blankets, my bare feet hitting the cold floor before I could think. The air felt wrong, thick, with a weight that made my skin crawl. I ran to my grandparents' room, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the howl for a moment. Grandma was already awake, perched on the edge of her bed, her robe pulled tight around her. Grandpa stood at the window, peering through a sliver in the curtains, his face pale in the dim light. "Hush," Grandma said, her voice sharp but trembling as she opened her arms. I buried myself against her, the familiar scent of her lavender soap grounding me, even as her body tensed. "Is that—" I started, but she cut me off. "Don't you worry, Samantha. Everything's fine." But her hands betrayed her, clutching me too tightly, her fingers digging into my shoulders. Grandpa turned from the window, and I saw it, a flicker of fear in his eyes, something I'd never seen before. He was my rock, the man who faced the mountains without flinching, but now his hands shook as he knelt before me. "I'm gonna sit in the living room for a spell," he said, his voice steady but forced. "You stay with Grandma. You hear?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He kissed my forehead, a fleeting warmth, then left the room. Moments later, he returned with his old double-barrel shotgun, the one that hung above the fireplace, more relic than weapon. I'd always thought it was decorative, but the way he held it, now knuckles white, told me otherwise. We stayed in their bedroom. The door closed, the world outside, reduced to that relentless sound. Grandma tried to distract me, reading from a worn copy of The Secret Garden, her voice soft but unsteady. We played Yahtzee, the dice rattling in the cup, but her eyes kept darting to the window, where the curtains blocked out the night. The howling shifted, sometimes so close, it felt like it was right outside, rattling the walls. Other times, fading to a distant wail, high on the ridge. Each surge sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across my skin, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. What was out there? The question gnawed at me, but I didn't dare ask. Grandma's forced smile, Grandpa's grip on the shotgun, they were answers enough. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. The howling didn't stop, not until the first gray light of dawn crept through the cracks in the curtains. Only then did the sound fade, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise. Grandpa was asleep in his armchair, the shotgun across his lap, his face etched with exhaustion. Grandma made pancakes that morning, piling them high with syrup, as if it could erase the night. When I tried to ask about the sound, she shut me down. Some things we don't talk about in the light of day, Samantha. Her voice was gentle, but final. A door slammed shut. I didn't push her. The memory of that sound, raw and unnatural, clung to me like damp clothes. I started watching the moon, tracking its phases, with a calendar Grandma kept in the kitchen. New moon nights became a ritual of fear, locked doors, drawn curtains, and a quiet that felt like holding your breath. The howler wasn't just a story anymore. It was real, a shadow that stalked the edges of my world, waiting for the dark to claim me. I didn't know then that I'd hear it again, that it would come closer, that it would chase me through the trees. But that night, at 8 years old, I learned the mountains weren't safe, and neither was I. The forest swallowed the light, the trees closing in like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the fading sky. I was 13, reckless and foolish, standing at the edge of the woods with Tammy, when the howl came again, a sound that ripped through years of buried fear, dragging me back to that night when I was 8. Spring break had brought Tammy to our house. Her laughter, a bright contrast to the hollow's heavy quiet. She was from town, where houses stood shoulder to shoulder, and the idea of a forest adventure thrilled her. We spent the day wandering the woods behind my house, our sneakers sinking into the damp earth, our voices tangled in arguments about Dylan, the boy we both swore liked the other. The creek babbled beside us, its water catching the last of the sunlight, and I lost track of time, lulled by the warmth of the April day. It wasn't until the shadows stretched long and sharp that I realized how late it was. "We need to head back," I said, my voice tight, the calendar in my mind flashing a warning new moon tonight. Tammy squinted at the sky, her ponytail swinging. "It's not that late. Sun's still up." I hesitated, her confidence chipping away at my unease. "It'll be dark by the time we get home," I insisted, but she rolled her eyes, teasing me for worrying. We started back, our pace slow, still caught in our debate about Dylan's haircut. Then it came a low, grating sound that clawed up from the earth, rising into a wail that made my blood run cold. It was the howler, unmistakable its voice, a jagged echo of that night 5 years ago. My pulse hammered in my throat, my feet rooted to the ground. "What's wrong?" Tammy asked, her brow furrowed. The howl came again, closer now, shredding the air. "Tammy, we need to run. Now." I grabbed her arm, but she laughed, shaking me off. "It's just some animal. Probably a cougar in heat." Her words stung, making me doubt myself. Maybe it was just a mountain lion. Maybe Grandpa's stories had twisted my mind. But the howl swelled again, nearer its rhythm. Wrong, unnatural. That's not a cougar, I said, my voice shaking. Tammy raised an eyebrow, her smirk faltering as the sound grew louder. See? Just some horny cat, she said, but her tone wavered. I wanted to believe her, to shrug off the fear clawing at my chest, but my body knew better. We need to go, I said, and this time she didn't argue. We walked faster, the creek's chatter fading as the forest grew still. Too still. The birds had stopped singing, the wind gone quiet. Then the howling stopped, and the silence hit like a physical blow, heavy and suffocating. Tammy, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Run. Now. She heard the panic in my voice, and this time she listened. We jogged along the path, the fading light turning the trees into looming shadows. My heart pounded, my breath ragged, the silence louder than the howl had been. 50 yards later, something landed behind us, a thud that shook the ground, vibrating through my bones. We froze, then turned slowly. The path was dark, the trees blotting out the sky, but I heard it, deep, heavy breathing, like a bellows stoking a fire. Run, I whispered, and we tore down the path, branches snapping at our faces, roots tripping our feet. The thing behind us moved faster than any human could its steps, a thunderous rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The house was in sight, a beacon of yellow light in the kitchen window, when a crack, like a gunshot, split the air. Bark exploded from a tree just feet away, and I screamed, thinking the creature had a weapon. Then I saw her grandma standing in the yard, Grandpa's shotgun in her hands, her face a mask of fury and fear. Run to the house, she screamed, and we did, our legs burning, our breath tearing at our lungs. We stumbled onto the porch, Grandma shoving us inside, slamming the door and throwing the deadbolt. What were you thinking? She demanded, her voice shaking, her face pale as moonlight. The shotgun trembled in her hands as she leaned it against the wall. Being out this late, tonight of all nights. I gasped apologies, my chest heaving, the terror still clawing at me. Tammy stood silent, her eyes wide, her confidence gone. Grandma took a deep breath, her composure returning like a mask. You're safe now, she said. That's what matters. But the lie in her voice was thin, and I knew the night wasn't over. The howler was still out there, circling, waiting. The house was a sanctuary, but it felt like a trap. The howl started again, distant at first, then circling closer, pacing the edges of our property like a predator testing a cage. We sat in Grandma's bedroom, the air thick with the scent of hot chocolate, but the sweetness couldn't mask the fear. Grandma brought us mugs of hot chocolate, the steam curling like ghosts in the dim light. Tammy and I sat on her bed, the quilt pulled tight around us, while Grandma settled into her rocking chair, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. "What your grandpa used to tell you about the howler?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy. I recounted the story, the words spilling out, the beast older than the mountains, its scream a warning, its silence a death sentence. Tammy listened, her eyes darting to the window, where the howl rose and fell like a tide. "That's what was chasing us?" she asked, her voice small. Grandma nodded, her gaze distant. "I've seen it twice in my life. Once when I was your age, and tonight." She told us how she'd glimpsed it as we burst from the trees, a massive shape covered in matted fur, moving with a grace that wasn't natural. She'd fired the shotgun missing, but scaring it off her hands, shaking so badly she feared she'd hit us instead. The howl grew louder, circling the house, and I felt it in my chest, a pressure that made breathing hard. Grandma kept us distracted, rolling dice for Yahtzee, her voice steady as she told stories of her childhood. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking to the window, her body tensing with every surge of sound. Tammy whispered to me, later as we sipped our drinks, "That was the most exciting sleepover ever." I begged her not to tell anyone. "They'll think we're crazy," I said. She grinned, promising to keep it our secret, but her eyes held a new wariness. The next morning, Tammy's parents came to pick her up, oblivious to the night's terror. Grandma established a new rule: no going outside after 4 p.m. on new moon days, no exceptions. I didn't argue. The memory of that chase, the thud of the creature's steps, the crack of Grandma's shotgun, it was burned into me. Grandpa had passed 2 years earlier, a stroke stealing him from us. But his stories lived on now, heavy with truth. I started checking the moon's phases, obsessively, marking the calendar, planning my life around those dark nights. The hollow felt smaller, the forest larger, its shadows deeper. Years later, I moved to the city, trading the mountains for concrete and noise. But I never escaped the howler. Every visit home, I'd drive that winding dirt road, my eyes scanning the trees, my heart racing, at the thought of that sound. The mountains had marked me their secrets, carved into my soul. Stay inside. Stay safe. The rule followed me, a tether to the hollow, to the creature that still haunted my dreams. The howler wasn't just a story. It was a warning, a truth I'd carry forever. And somewhere in the dark heart of those mountains, it was still waiting. The forest exhaled a cold, damp breath that clung to my skin, a warning I couldn't shake, as my wife and I stepped into the Appalachian shadows. Something was watching us, not with eyes, but with a hunger that pulsed through the trees. The mountains of rural Virginia were our sanctuary, a place where my wife and I could escape the grind of life and lose ourselves in the hunt. Since 2010, a year after we exchanged vows, we'd made it a ritual. Every November, we'd pack our rifles, our thermos of black coffee, and our dreams of a good deer season, heading to a small cabin we rented from an old man named Earl. His place was a weathered shack, tucked deep in the Appalachian folds, surrounded by pines that stood like silent sentinels. Earl charged us next to nothing, his only ask being a share of venison. Jerky when we returned the next year, his gap-toothed grin and stories of the mountains made him feel like family, though his eyes always held a glint of something unspoken when he talked about the woods. We'd had plenty of hunting trips over the years, some fruitful, some empty-handed, but they were always predictable. The forest had its rhythms, the rustle of leaves under deer hooves, the distant call of a bobcat, the way dawn painted the ridges gold. But in November 2014, something shifted. The air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. We'd been at Earl's cabin for 3 days, our cooler still empty, not a single decent buck in sight. Frustration gnawed at us, so we decided to venture north to a patch of forest we'd never explored. The moment we crossed into that new territory, the world changed. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches twisting into shapes that seemed to claw at the sky. The undergrowth was dense, a tangle of thorns and vines that snagged at our boots. The silence was different too. Not the calm quiet of a sleeping forest, but a stillness that felt like it was waiting. My wife, always the sharper one, noticed it first. Her hazel eyes scanned the horizon, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. "This place feels wrong," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the crunch of leaves beneath us. I nodded, my gut tightening, but we pressed on, setting up our blind beneath a massive oak. We sat for hours, rifles at the ready, the cold seeping through our layers. the forest remained silent. No birds, no wind, just the weight of our own breathing. Feel it now, the way your skin prickles when you know you're not alone. I tried to focus on the hunt, on the possibility of a deer stepping into view, but my mind kept drifting to the stories Earl told late at night, tales of things that didn't belong in these woods, things older than the mountains themselves. Just after sunrise, the air turned sharp, like a blade pressed against my throat. The temperature plummeted, not gradually, but all at once, as if the forest had sucked in a frigid breath. My wife's hand found mine, her fingers trembling. You feel that she asked, her voice tight. I nodded, my heart thudding against my ribs. The pressure in the air grew like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear, a pale blue that offered no answers. Then it came a sound that ripped through the silence like a saw through bone. High-pitched grating, like metal grinding against metal. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the ridges, until it felt like it was coming from everywhere. My wife's grip tightened, her nails digging into my palm. "What the hell is that?" she hissed. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, my mind racing to place the sound. It wasn't a deer, not a bear, not even a bobcat. It was something else, something that didn't belong in the natural order. We peered through the blind, our eyes straining against the shadows. About 200 yards away on a ridge, cloaked in mist, something moved. At first, I thought it was a man, tall upright, striding through the trees. But the way it moved was wrong, too fast, too jerky, like a machine with broken gears. It was bigger than any person, its silhouette dark against the morning light. And then I saw them wings, not feathered like a bird's, but leathery, stretching wide, at least 15 feet across. My wife gasped, pointing. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The creature paused, its head turning, as if it sensed us. The metallic screech came again, louder this time, vibrating through my chest. Listen closely. Now, imagine that sound clawing at your ears, a scream that doesn't just pierce, but burrows into your bones. We didn't wait to see more. We grabbed our gear, our movements frantic, and bolted back toward the cabin. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches snapping at our faces, the ground uneven beneath our boots. That screech followed us, shifting directions, as if the thing was circling, playing with us. By the time we reached the cabin, our lungs burned, our faces flushed with panic. We locked the door, our hands shaking as we checked the windows. My wife tried to laugh it off, suggesting it was just a large bird, an eagle maybe distorted by the light. I nodded, wanting to believe her, but we both knew better. That night, Earl stopped by with firewood, his weathered face lit by the glow of our lantern. We told him what we'd seen, keeping our voices casual, like we were sharing a funny story. His smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "Where exactly did you see it?" he asked, his tone sharp. When we described the northern woods, Earl leaned back, his fingers tightening around his coffee mug. "Folks round here call that the snallygaster," he said, his voice low. "Been stories about it for over 100 years. Part reptile, part bird, with tentacles, and a scream like metal on metal." He paused, his eyes distant. "You're lucky you got out when you did." Feel the weight of his words, the way they settle in your chest like a stone. Earl's story wasn't just a tale, it was a warning, one that would haunt us long after we left those woods. The ridge loomed in my nightmares, its shadows hiding a creature that knew we'd seen it. 5 years later, we returned to those woods, chasing the thrill of the hunt. But deep down, I knew we were tempting something far older, far hungrier. Earl's words stuck with us, a splinter in our minds we couldn't pull out. The snallygaster wasn't just a story, it was real. Its leathery wings and grinding screech burned into our memories. After that trip in 2014, we swore we'd stick to safer grounds, the familiar trails Earl pointed us to. For 5 years, we did just that, hauling back deer, sharing jerky with Earl, pretending we could outrun the fear. But the northern woods called to us a siren song, woven into the wind that rustled through the pines. By November 2019, we were back at the cabin. Our rifles polished our spirits high from a good season. 2 bucks already hung in our cooler, their weight a testament to our skill. But the northern woods lingered in my thoughts, a challenge I couldn't ignore. My wife felt it too. I saw it in the way her eyes flicked toward the horizon, the way her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "One last hunt," she said, her voice half joking, half daring. I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach. We chose a spot a mile east of the cabin, a place we knew well, far from the northern ridge. The morning was thick with the air heavy with moisture that clung to our jackets. Visibility was poor, maybe 50 yards at best, the world reduced to shades of gray. We settled into our blind, the familiar routine calming our nerves. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional drip of dew from the branches above. Breathe in the damp air. Feel the chill settle into your bones, the way it makes you question every sound. An hour passed, then 2, My wife shifted beside me, her breath steady but tense. Then a rustle came from a thicket 40 yards ahead, sharp and deliberate. I raised my rifle, my heart pounding, expecting a deer to step into view. But what emerged was no deer. It was massive, the size of a black bear, but wrong in every way. Its neck was long snake-like, ending in a head that gleamed like polished steel. Not a beak, but something harder, colder. Its 4 legs moved with a reptilian grace, bending at angles that made my stomach churn. And those tentacles, 6, maybe more, writhed from its shoulders, curling and uncurling, like they were tasting the fog. See it now, the way its movements defy logic, the way its presence makes the air feel too small. My wife and I froze, our breaths shallow, our bodies pressed against the blind. The creature didn't see us. It was scanning the ground, its head dipping low, as if searching for something lost. The fog seemed to part around it, revealing glimpses of its dark, scaled body, black, or perhaps deep green, impossible to tell in the dim light. Then it made that sound again, softer this time, like metal whispering to itself. Hear it, the way it crawls into your skull, a sound that doesn't belong in this world. We didn't move, didn't speak. My wife's hand crept toward her phone, her fingers trembling as she tried to take a picture. The movement was small, but the creature's head snapped up, its body going rigid. Feel your heart stop, the way mine did when it turned toward our blind. It couldn't see us. We were hidden downwind. But it knew. It reared up, standing nearly 8 feet tall, its leathery wings unfurling, ribbed and glistening in the faint sunlight. The screech came again, louder, sharper, a sound that felt like it could split the world in two. Then it moved not toward us, but parallel, gliding through the fog with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. The ground trembled under its weight, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, and something metallic, like blood or rust. We weighted our bodies, pressed against the cold earth, until the sound faded. 10 minutes later, we grabbed our gear and ran the fog swallowing our footsteps. Back at the cabin, we checked my wife's phone, hoping for proof, but her hands had been too unsteady to press the button. We packed up and left, not even stopping to say goodbye to Earl. The drive home was silent, the weight of what we'd seen pressing down on us. Feel it now, the way fear lingers, a shadow you can't outrun. Every night since I hear that screech in my dreams, a reminder that the snarly gaster isn't just a story. It's still out there, waiting, searching for us. The road stretched endlessly before us as we drove away from Earl's cabin, the mountains fading in the rearview mirror. But the snarly gaster didn't fade. Its image was seared into our minds, those leathery wings, that metallic beak, those writhing tentacles. My wife, ever the curious one, broke the silence. First, "We need to know what it is," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she searched for answers. What she found chilled us more than the creature itself. The snarly gaster wasn't just Earl's folktale. It was woven into the fabric of Appalachian history, whispered about since the 1700s. Old newspaper clippings from the early 1900s described sightings: a beast with a reptile's body, a bird's wings, and tentacles like an octopus. Some claimed it had a single eye glowing like a lantern in the dark, though we hadn't seen that. Others spoke of a metallic beak, sharp enough to tear through flesh, and a scream that could drive men mad. It was said to hunt livestock, sometimes people, its wings casting shadows over moonless nights. Imagine standing in those woods, the weight of centuries pressing down, knowing this thing has hunted these mountains longer than your family has lived. My wife read aloud, her voice trembling, as she pieced together the legend. The consistency was what unnerved us most. Our two encounters, 5 years apart, matched the stories perfectly. The leathery wings, the metallic screech, the sense that it was searching for something. Back home, we tried to move on to bury the fear under the routines of daily life. But the snarly gaster followed us not in body, but in spirit. I'd wake in the night, convinced I'd heard that screech outside our window, only to find silence. My wife would pause mid-conversation, her eyes distant, as if she saw those tentacles writhing in the shadows. We stopped talking about it, but it lived in the spaces between our words, a shared secret that bound us tighter and tore us apart. The mountains still call to us their beauty, a lure we can't resist. But we haven't gone back to Earl's cabin, haven't hunted in those northern woods. Earl passed away last year, his stories buried with him, but I can still hear his voice, warning us to stay away from the ridge at dawn and dusk. Listen to him now, his words a lifeline you didn't know you needed. The snarly gaster is still out there, its wings slicing through the fog, its screech echoing through the ridges. People still report sightings, blurry photos, and shaky videos that never quite capture the truth. I don't know if it's a creature, a spirit, or something science hasn't named, All I know is that it's real, and it's waiting. Feel it, watching you. It's hunger, a pulse in the dark, a reminder that some things in these mountains don't want to be found. My heart pounded in the dark, a rhythm I couldn't escape, as if the house itself was breathing, waiting for something to slither out from the corners of my childhood. I was 5 years old, tucked into my bed, in our small, creaking house, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. The walls were thin, letting every sound bleed through, every shout, every sob from my parents' arguments that tore through the night like jagged knives. They fought over money, over Dad's endless hours at the car dealership, over who forgot to pick me up from kindergarten. Their voices were a storm I couldn't outrun, echoing in my ears, even when I buried my head under the pillow. I'd lie there, eyes squeezed shut, imagining them splitting apart, like Tommy's parents, picturing myself shuffled to some gray apartment, only seeing Dad on weekends. The fear twisted my stomach into knots, a cold weight that made me feel smaller than I already was. Our house sat at the edge of a dirt road, surrounded by woods that seemed to swallow the world beyond. The trees loomed tall, their branches clawing at the sky, and at night they cast shadows that danced across my Batman nightlight's faint glow. That night, in the fall, I remember the dry scrape of leaves against my window, like skeletal fingers tapping for attention. I woke to a sensation that wasn't a sound, but a presence. Something heavy in the air pressing against my chest. My eyes fluttered open, and there it was, a figure standing beside my bed, its silhouette framed against the dim light. It looked like Mom. Her familiar shape, the curve of her hair, the long white nightgown she always wore. But something was wrong. The air was too cold, sharper than the usual chill of our poorly heated home, and her silence felt deliberate. She didn't speak, didn't move like Mom would with her soft hums or gentle touch. Instead, she stood rigid, her head tilted just enough to keep her face in shadow. "Follow me." Her finger curled a slow, beckoning gesture that sent a shiver racing down my spine. I didn't want to move, but my body obeyed, as if pulled by an invisible thread. My bare feet hit the cold floorboards, each step creaking under my weight. The figure glided toward the window, which was already open halfway, something impossible for me to manage. Those old wooden sash windows were warped, swollen with damp, and stuck so tight I'd seen Dad struggle to budge them. Yet there it was, gaping like a hungry mouth, letting in the night's icy breath. The figure leaned out, then turned back, motioning again. Come. My heart screamed to stay, but my legs carried me forward, drawn to the shape I thought was Mom. I climbed onto the sill, the rough wood scraping my palms, the cold air biting my face. Outside, the world was silent. No crickets, no wind, just a void that swallowed sound. The figure was already out there, half visible in the moonlight, her gown catching the faint silver glow. I hoisted myself up my small body, trembling as I swung my legs over. The last thing I remember is the ground rushing toward me, the holly bush's sharp leaves pricking my skin, and then nothing. Blackness swallowed me whole. I woke to chaos. My parents' voices, sharp with panic, cut through the morning fog. I was lying in Mom's flower bed, curled in the damp mulch, my pajamas soaked with dew. Small scratches stung my arms and face as if I'd been dragged through thorns. Dad scooped me up, his hands shaking, while Mom's face was a mask of confusion and fear. Why did you make me sleep outside? I asked her, my voice small and trembling. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening, but no words coming out. Honey, I was in bed all night, she said finally, her voice breaking. I never came to your room. Dad checked the window. Still open, no signs of tampering. They questioned me, gentle but urgent. Had I climbed out? Was I sleepwalking? I insisted it was Mom, that she'd called me out, but their faces told me they didn't believe it. Not fully. For weeks they checked my window every night, and eventually Dad nailed it shut. I tried to forget to bury the memory under the weight of childhood distractions, but that night left a mark, a quiet dread that lingered in the corners of my mind. Life moved on. By the time I was 7, Dad got a better job, with hours that didn't keep him away until midnight. They started counseling at the church, and the fights grew quieter, replaced by cautious smiles and date nights. But that night, that figure stayed with me, a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd catch myself staring at the woods behind our house, wondering what had wanted me to follow it, and why it had looked like Mom, 12 years old, and the world felt like it was closing in each day, a reminder that I was invisible to the people I needed most. Middle school was a battlefield. I was smaller than the other kids, an easy target for their taunts. My clothes never quite right. My interests, comic books and video games, deemed childish. My friends were drifting away, chasing sports and crushes, leaving me behind in a loneliness I couldn't name. At home, things were better, but not perfect. Mom and Dad were happier, their date nights a weekly ritual, but I felt like an afterthought. "Not now, honey," Mom would say when I asked her to play a game. "Can it wait?" Dad would mumble his eyes on his yard work or the TV. I craved their attention, a desperate ache that grew heavier each day. So I hatched a plan, a stupid, childish plan, born of hurt and desperation. I'd run away just for a day to make them notice me. I'd hide in the woods behind our house, close enough to come back when I was ready, but far enough to make them worry. In my 12-year-old mind, it was foolproof. They'd realize how much they missed me, apologize, and things would go back to how they used to be when we'd laugh together over board games or ice cream. I packed a backpack with essentials, a sleeve of saltine crackers, 2 granola bars, a water bottle, my Game Boy Advance, a flashlight, my favorite X-Men comic, and a light jacket. I didn't set an alarm too loud, too unreliable, so I stayed up, watching the clock tick toward dawn. At 5:30 a.m., the sky just starting to lighten, I crept out the back door. The air was cool, heavy with mist, and my sneakers were soaked within minutes. I followed a familiar path into the woods, my flashlight cutting through the gray dawn. I settled under a massive oak tree, one I'd climbed before its gnarled roots, forming a perfect seat. From there, I could still see the faint outline of our house through the trees. I felt clever, triumphant, imagining Mom's panic when she found my bed empty, Dad's voice calling my name. I played Pokemon, munched on crackers, and spun stories in my head about being a lone survivalist, master of the wild. The morning dragged on. Boredom crept in heavier than I'd expected. Climbing the oak was harder than I remembered, my arms too weak to pull me high. I threw rocks at other trees, aiming for knots in the bark, but my heart wasn't in it. By noon, my Game Boy's batteries died mid-battle, leaving me staring at a blank screen. I ate a granola bar, rationing my food like a castaway, but the thrill of my plan was fading. I started to miss my bed, my room, the warmth of the house. The woods, once familiar, felt too big, too quiet. Then I heard its footsteps, deliberate and human, coming from deeper in the woods, not from the direction of home. My heart leapt. Maybe it was Mom or Dad already searching for me. "Mom," I called, my voice breaking the stillness. The steps stopped, and the forest went silent, an unnatural hush that pressed against my ears. I waited, straining to hear more, but nothing came. The quiet was worse than the sound, like the woods were holding their breath, watching me. I moved restless, pacing around the oak, then followed a small stream for a while before circling back. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but the hairs on my neck were prickling. Sitting again, facing deeper into the forest, I tried to calm myself. Then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet away, her shape so achingly familiar. It was Mom, or so I thought. The blue sweater she'd worn that morning hung on her frame, but her face was lost in shadow, her saunts unnaturally still. Her arms seemed too long dangling past her hips, and her head tilted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. "Mom," I called softer this time. She nodded, slow and deliberate, and beckoned with that same twitchy gesture I remembered from years ago. My heart raced, a mix of relief and unease. I stood brushing dirt off my jeans and started toward her, already babbling apologies. I was coming back. I swear, I just wanted you to notice me. I didn't mean to. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked deeper into the woods. Her movements too quick, too fluid, like she wasn't touching the ground. I followed my voice spilling out, explaining how lonely I'd felt, how I just wanted them to care. She stayed ahead, always just out of reach, glancing back to beckon me again. The trees grew denser, the path unfamiliar, the underbrush clawing at my legs. "Why are you going so fast?" I called, jogging to keep up. "Where are we going?" No answer. The rational part of my brain screamed that something was wrong, but I pushed it down, clinging to the hope that this was Mom, that she'd turn and hug me and take me home. I ran toward her, desperate to close the distance, but the ground betrayed me, vanishing into a void that swallowed my hope. The figure moved faster now, a fleeting shadow weaving through the trees, and I stumbled after her, my breath ragged, my sneakers slipping on the damp earth. The forest was changing, the trees older, their branches knitting together to block the sky. I called out again, "Mom, wait!" But she didn't slow her silhouette, flickering in and out of sight. My chest tightened, not from the run, but from a growing certainty that this wasn't right. The air felt heavy, charged with something ancient and wrong, like the forest itself was warning me to turn back. I didn't see the ravine until it was too late. The ground dropped away, and I tumbled my body, slamming into rocks and branches, the world spinning in a blur of pain. I landed hard at the bottom, the air knocked out of me, my chest crushed under an invisible weight. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, my lungs screaming for air. When I finally gasped, the pain came alive, sharp stings from scratches, a deep ache in my ribs, a burning gash on my arm. I moved each limb terrified of broken bones, but by some miracle, I was intact, just battered and bleeding. The ravine was a jagged scar in the earth 15 feet deep, its walls loose dirt and rock. The dry creek bed at the bottom was littered with stones and twisted roots. I didn't recognize this place. I'd never wandered this far. Panic clawed at me as I tried to climb back up, but the dirt crumbled under my hands, rocks slipping under my feet. I fell twice, scraping my palms, raw, my knees bruised. I shouted for Mom, for Dad, my voice hoarse and desperate, but the forest swallowed my cries. The silence was suffocating, broken only by faint bird calls and the rustle of leaves. I sat, shivering my tears, mixing with the blood on my face, and waited for a response that never came. After half an hour, I gave up on the steep side and crossed to the other, where the slope was gentler. I clawed my way up, gripping tree roots, my arms trembling with effort. At the top, I collapsed, gasping, hoping to see something familiar, a path, a landmark. But the forest stretched endlessly, a maze of identical trees. The canopy blocked the sun, leaving me directionless. I picked a path and walked, my legs aching, my scratches burning. Hours passed, the light fading to orange streaks through the branches. Dusk was coming, and with it, a primal fear I'd never known. I'd been in these woods at twilight before, but never alone, never this lost. My voice was gone from shouting, my throat raw. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness so thick it felt alive. I tripped over roots, my hands catching on sharp rocks, my body screaming for rest. Exhausted, I sank against a tree, its bark rough against my back. Tears came again, hot and unstoppable, as I realized how stupid I'd been. I curled up, my backpack clutched to my chest, and cried myself to sleep, the forest's silence wrapping around me like a shroud. I woke to a cold weight beneath me, as if the ground itself had turned to ice. Something was holding me, its touch sharp and deliberate, scraping my cheek like a claw. My back was pressed against a body, not the tree I'd fallen asleep against, but something alive, its limbs unnaturally cold. My heart stopped as I looked up, expecting Mom's face, her familiar hair framing it. Instead, I saw nothing. No eyes, no nose, just smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull, a wide, lipless mouth grinning in the dark. The smile grew wider, splitting the face in a way that wasn't human, and I screamed, scrambling away my body, shaking so hard I could barely stand. The thing was gone. When I looked back, swallowed by the darkness, I pressed against a real tree, my breath ragged, my eyes straining for any sign of it. Then I heard Dad's voice, faint but real, calling my name. At first, I didn't trust it, fearing another trick. But it was him, deep, hoarse, unmistakable. I shouted back, my voice breaking, and kept calling until flashlight beams pierced the dark. My parents appeared. Mom's face streaked with tears. Dad's arms wrapping around me. Search and rescue volunteers followed their faces grim. Thank God, Dad kept saying, his voice shaking. Mom held me so tightly I couldn't breathe, her sobs mixing with mine. They carried me home, but the forest's shadow clung to me, a stain I couldn't wash away. The paramedics cleaned my cuts, bandaged the gash on my arm, and checked for infections. The police asked gentle questions, their eyes soft with pity. I told them about running away, about the figure that looked like Mom, about falling into the ravine and waking in the lap of that thing. They didn't press me, but I saw their glances, doubt, concern, maybe fear. At home, my parents sat on my bed, their faces pale. I poured out the story, the night when I was 5. The figure at the window, the same gesture, the same shape. And now, the faceless thing in the woods, its claw on my cheek, its smile splitting the dark. Dad's face went white, and Mom made the sign of the cross, something she did only when terrified. They didn't say they believed me, but they didn't dismiss it either. They made me promise never to go into the woods alone again, to talk to them if I felt neglected. I nodded, too shaken to argue. We moved a year later. Dad's new job taking us to a city far from those mountains. Before we left, I overheard Dad talking to a neighbor about missing kids in those woods, some found, some not. The words sank into me heavy and cold. Now 20 years later, I live in a world of concrete and streetlights, but the forest lives in me. I check the locks at night, my heart racing at the sound of leaves against the window. I see that faceless smile in my dreams, feel the cold touch of its claw. Was it a spirit? A demon? Something older than the mountains? Why did it choose me? Why did it wear Mom's face? I don't know, but I'm certain it wanted me twice. It tried, and twice it failed. I don't go into the woods anymore, not even in daylight. Some things are better left alone, their secrets buried in the shadows of Appalachia. The air was thick with the scent of burning pine, and the backyard flickered under the dying glow of the bonfire. I was 8, tucked in bed, but the laughter from the adults outside slithered through my window, teasing me with a world I wasn't allowed to join. I lay there, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, the faint hum of cicadas blending with the low murmur of voices. It was a summer night in the Appalachian foothills, the kind where the heat clings to your skin even after the sun's gone down. My name's Ted, and back then, I was just a kid who wanted to stay up past 9 to sit by the fire and feel like I belonged. But Mom's rules were ironclad. Bedtime was non-negotiable, especially when Uncle Lester was over with his cooler of Budweiser and his beat-up guitar. What I didn't know as I drifted on the edge of sleep was that something was watching from the woods, something that didn't belong in our world. Bonfires were a ritual in our family, a sacred gathering where the adults traded stories and beers while I was banished to my room. Uncle Lester, with his gravelly laugh and endless tales of fishing trips gone wrong, was the heart of those nights. He'd show up with his girlfriend, Sherry, sometimes, or a neighbor Dad had invited from down the road. They'd set up lawn chairs in a loose circle around the fire pit, the flames casting long shadows that danced across the grass. I'd sneak to my window, pressing my face against the cool glass, watching the orange glow flicker on their faces. They'd laugh, tell stories I was too young to hear. I hated being left out, hated the way Mom would shoo me off with a firm, "Not now, Ted." But that night, something felt different. The air was heavier, like it was holding its breath. I remember lying in bed, the sheets sticking to my legs, my Batman nightlight casting a faint yellow glow across the room. The voices outside were a comforting hum. At first, Dad's deep chuckle, Lester's slurred storytelling, Sherry's high-pitched giggle. I was half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of their words, when a sharp sound cut through the haze. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't the crackle of the fire. It was a yell, sharp, panicked, the kind that makes your heart lurch before you even know why. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The voices outside turned chaotic, a jumble of shouts, and the sound of feet pounding across the yard. Something was wrong. I scrambled to my window, my small hands fumbling with the curtain, but the backyard was too dark, the fire reduced to glowing embers. All I could make out were shapes, moving fast, darting toward the house. The back door slammed open, then shut, with a force that rattled the walls. I heard the deadbolt slide into place, a heavy clunk that felt final. My heart was racing now, my 8-year-old mind spinning with possibilities. Were they drunk? Was it a bear? A coyote? We lived on the edge of the woods, where the trees grew thick and wild, so it wasn't impossible. But then came the laughter. Dad and Lester, breathless, almost hysterical, like they'd just escaped something ridiculous, but terrifying. I stood frozen by the window, straining to hear their muffled voices through the walls. "You see that thing?" Lester's voice was shaky, not his usual cocky drawl. Dad's response was too low to catch, but it had an edge, like he was trying to convince himself of something. I wanted to run out to demand answers, but fear kept me rooted. Whatever had chased them wasn't normal. I crept back to bed, pulling the covers over my head, as if that could shield me from whatever was out there. The laughter died down, replaced by the low murmur of their voices, now cautious, almost secretive. I strained to listen, catching fragments, small as a kid, yelling like it was pissed, came out of nowhere. My imagination ran wild, painting pictures of monsters from the stories Lester used to tell me about creatures that lived in the hollows, waiting for careless kids who wandered too far. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside felt like a warning. I kept my eyes on the window, half expecting to see something staring back. The next morning, no one mentioned it. Dad was bleary-eyed, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, while Mom bustled around, humming like nothing had happened. Lester was gone before I woke up, his truck missing from the driveway. I tried asking Dad about the yelling, about why they'd run inside, but he just ruffled my hair and said, "Grown-up stuff, kiddo. Don't worry about it." His smile was tight, not the easy grin he usually wore. Mom shot him a look, quick but sharp, and changed the subject to pancakes. I knew better than to push, but the memory stuck, burrowing into the back of my mind like a splinter. It wasn't just the yelling or the running. It was the way the air had felt that night, heavy with something unspoken, something that didn't belong in our backyard. Years passed, and that night faded into the haze of childhood memories. We moved to a bigger house when I was 12, leaving the old place behind with its sagging porch and the woods that seemed to creep closer every year. Bonfires became less frequent, replaced by barbecues or movie nights. Lester still came around, but he was quieter as he got older, his stories less wild. I grew up, got married, had kids of my own. Life moved on, and that strange night became just another story I'd tell myself when I couldn't sleep, a half-remembered dream that felt too vivid to be real. But it was real, and deep down, I knew it. 27 years later, I sat across from Uncle Lester in my living room, the glow of the TV flickering as my kids cheered at Sonic the Hedgehog. His gray hair glinted under the lamplight, but his eyes still held that mischievous spark. I didn't know why the memory of that night came rushing back, but I could feel it clawing at me, demanding to be let out. I was 35 now, a husband, a father, living in a tidy suburban house far from the Appalachian woods. But sitting there with Lester sprawled on my couch, a beer in his hand, I felt like that 8-year-old kid again, staring out my window into the dark. I had to know what happened that night, what had sent him and Dad running, like they'd seen a ghost. "Hey, Uncle Lester," I said, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "Remember those bonfires at Mom and Dad's old place? That one night, when I was a kid, when you and Dad came running into the house like something was after you." His eyebrows shot up, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, fear maybe, or recognition. Then that slow, sly grin spread across his face, the one he always wore when he was about to tell a story no one would believe. "Holy crap, Ted. You remember that?" he said, taking a swig of his beer. His voice was light, but his eyes darted to the kids, making sure they were glued to the TV. He didn't want them to hear this. I leaned forward, my heart picking up speed. "Yeah, I heard you yelling, running across the yard. You locked the door and laughed like it was nothing, but you sounded scared." "What happened?" Lester chuckled, but it was strained, like he was trying to shake off the memory. He set his beer down, his fingers lingering on the bottle, and leaned back, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice dropping low. "But I swear on my life, it's true." I waited, the hum of the TV fading into the background, the room feeling smaller, tighter, like the walls were closing in. Whatever he was about to say, it wasn't just a drunken prank. "Your dad and I were out there, just the two of us," he began. "The fire was dying down, and we were pretty buzzed, telling stupid stories about work, you know. It was late, probably past midnight. The yard was dark, the woods pitch black beyond the firelight. Then, out of nowhere, this thing comes running out of the trees." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine, searching for doubt. I didn't give him any. "It wasn't a kid, Ted. It was a man, but small, maybe 2.5 feet tall. Wore a pointed green hat, like something out of a fairy tale. But his face, long nose, ears stretched out like they'd been pulled. And he was mad, screaming in some language I couldn't make heads or tails of. Sounded like he was cursing us out, like we'd pissed him off just by being there. I laughed, but it came out weak, more nervous than amused. "You're pulling my leg." "Right." Lester's grin faded, and he held up a hand like he was swearing an oath. I ain't lying, Ted. Ask your dad. He saw it, too. This little guy came charging at us, fast as hell, dodging around the fire pit like he was gonna tackle us. We were scared shitless, but it was so damn weird. We couldn't help laughing. We bolted for the house, locked the door, and just stood there, trying to figure out what the hell we'd seen. My skin prickled the memory of that night, sharpening in my mind their panicked voices, the slam of the door. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a coyote. What was it? I asked my voice, barely above a whisper. Lester shrugged, but his eyes were uneasy, like he was still trying to make sense of it. We went out the next morning, hungover as hell, looking for tracks, anything. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a trace. Your dad thought maybe we'd imagined it. Maybe it was some animal we mistook in the dark. But we both saw the same thing, described it the same way. Nobody around here's that small, Ted. And that language, it wasn't human. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. I've been in those woods my whole life, hunted, fished, camped. Never saw anything like it, before or since. But I'll tell you this, I don't sit by fires out there anymore, not after dark. The room felt colder. Now, the cheerful noise of the kids' movie jarring against the weight of his words. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was just a story, but the way Lester's hands shook as he picked up his beer told me he believed every word. And deep down, so did I. Something had been out there that night. Something that didn't belong in our world. I thought about the woods behind our old house, how they seemed to stretch on forever, hiding things no one could explain. I thought about the stories Lester used to tell me as a kid about creatures that lived in the hollows, waiting for the careless. Maybe they weren't just stories. That night, after Lester left and the kids were in bed, I stood at my kitchen window, staring out at the tidy backyard of my suburban home. It was nothing like the wild, untamed woods of my childhood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I checked the locks twice before bed, a habit I hadn't thought about in years. Some memories don't fade. They wait, lurking in the shadows, ready to pull you back. And as I lay in bed, the hum of the cicadas outside sounded too much like that night. Too much like something waiting just beyond the light.